Welcome to Monk's Temple. Before we do anything else, just arrive. Feel the weight of your body where you sit or lie. Feel the air on your skin. Notice the light or darkness around you. There is nowhere else to be right now. Nothing else to do. You are simply here, and that is enough. Now I want to ask you something that seems simple but will reveal everything about your inner world. Who are you? Pause for a moment and really ask yourself. Who is the you listening to these words? Perhaps a name came first. Perhaps a role. I am a parent, a partner, a teacher, a caregiver. Perhaps a trait. I am anxious, I am kind, I am successful, I am tired. Perhaps your body. I am tall, I am in pain, I am aging. All of these are answers. All are true in a certain way. But if we keep asking, keep digging, we eventually hit a wall. Behind the name, behind the roles, behind the characteristics, behind the body, who is there? What is this thing we call I? This is the most important investigation any human can undertake. Not because we will find a final answer to frame and hang on a wall, but because the act of looking itself begins to shift something fundamental. We start to see that this I we spend our entire lives protecting is not the solid, permanent thing we assumed it was. And in that seeing, a different way of living becomes possible. In the Buddhist tradition, this investigation is called anatta, usually translated as no self or not self. Let me be clear about what this means because it's often misunderstood. When the Buddha pointed to no self, he wasn't saying you don't exist. He wasn't saying you're an illusion or a nothing. That would be nihilism, and he explicitly rejected that view. What he was saying is that the self is not a thing. It's not a fixed entity we can locate anywhere. It's a process. It's a verb disguised as a noun. Think about a river. We give it a name. We call it the Thames or the Ganges. We think of it as a thing, an entity. But if you go looking for the river, what do you actually find? Water molecules moving in one direction, constantly changing, constantly replaced. The river you see today is not the river you saw yesterday. Not one molecule remains the same. And yet we still call it a river. It's a convenient label. But if we mistake the label for reality, if we believe there's some permanent riverness that exists apart from the flowing water, we've missed the point entirely. The self is exactly that river. We give it a name. We call it John or Sarah. We think of it as a thing. But if we go looking, what do we actually find? A body constantly changing, cells dying and being reborn. Feelings arising and passing away moment by moment. Perceptions that label every experience. Thoughts and emotions flowing through the mind like clouds through sky. Consciousness that knows all this, flickering into being and ceasing with every new moment. This is all we ever find. A flowing, dynamic, ever-changing process. There is no permanent self hiding behind it all. No little person inside the head watching the movie. The movie is all there is. This may sound abstract, but its implications for daily life are anything but. Every time you feel anxious, every time you feel offended, every time you feel jealous or afraid, you are experiencing the contraction of a self that believes itself real and threatened. The anxiety isn't the problem. The jealousy isn't the problem. The problem is identification with them. The problem is believing these passing states are who you are. And because you believe they're who you are, you have to defend them. Justify them. Act on them. Think about the last time someone criticized you. Maybe at work, a comment about something you'd worked hard on. Maybe at home, a remark from someone you love. What happened inside you? Did you simply receive the information, evaluate it calmly, and respond with curiosity? Or did something else happen? Did you feel a lurch in your stomach? Heat in your chest? The sudden urge to defend, explain, counterattack. That lurch, that heat, that urge, that's the self in fear. It's not you experiencing a problem. It's you experiencing yourself as the problem. For a moment, the criticism didn't just target something you did. It targeted who you are. And because who you are feels so solid, the threat feels existential. You have to protect. You have to push back. But here's the liberating truth Buddhism invites us to investigate: the self that feels threatened isn't as solid as it appears. It's a construction. A habit. A collection of memories, beliefs, and identifications assembled since childhood. And because it's constructed, it can be deconstructed. Not by force. Not by willpower. Not by trying to get rid of it. But simply by looking. By seeing clearly. By understanding. Before we go deeper, I invite you to make this practice a regular part of your life. If what we're exploring resonates, if you sense there might be another way to live beyond the constant churn of anxiety and self-protection, please take a moment to subscribe to Monk's Temple. Subscribing is a small gesture, but it's powerful. It's a way of saying to yourself, my inner peace matters. I'm willing to show up for it. So hit that subscribe button, and let's continue this journey together. Let's go deeper into this investigation of who you really are. Not through philosophy or abstract theory, but through direct observation of your own experience. And to do that, we need to look at something the Buddha identified as the building blocks of what we call self. He called them the 5 aggregates. Think of them as 5 distinct processes constantly interacting to create the illusion of a solid, separate person. The first is form. This is your physical body. The flesh, the bones, the organs, the cells. We say, my body, as if we own it, as if it's a possession we control. But is it really? Can you command your hair not to gray? Can you tell your cells not to age? Can you order your heart never to falter? Your body is constantly changing, constantly in flux. The body you had as a child is gone. The body you will have in old age hasn't arrived yet. Right now, in this moment, your body is a river of matter, atoms flowing in and out, cells dying and regenerating. There's nothing solid to hold on to. The second aggregate is feeling. In Buddhism, this doesn't mean emotion. It means the basic pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral tone of every experience. Right now, as you listen, there's a feeling tone. Maybe it's pleasant because these words are bringing relief or curiosity. Maybe it's unpleasant because something I'm saying is challenging or uncomfortable. Maybe it's neutral, just background noise. This feeling tone is arising moment by moment, triggered by everything you see, hear, taste, touch, smell, and think. And notice how quickly you react to it. Pleasant feeling arises, and immediately there's a pull toward it. Wanting more. Unpleasant feeling arises, and immediately there's a push away. Wanting it to stop. This wanting and not wanting is where the sense of self really gets its grip. The third aggregate is perception. This is the faculty of recognition. It's the part of mind that labels experience. When light hits your eyes, perception says, blue. When sound hits your ears, perception says, bird singing. When a thought arises, perception says, memory from childhood. Perception is necessary. We couldn't navigate the world without it. But perception also freezes reality. It takes something fluid and dynamic and pins it down with a word. And then we mistake the word for the thing itself. We mistake the map for the territory. The fourth aggregate is mental formations. This is a vast category. It includes every thought, every intention, every habit, every emotion, every reaction. It's the part of mind that, when pleasant feeling arises, says, I want more. When unpleasant feeling arises, says, get this away from me. When someone criticizes you, mental formations generate defensiveness. When someone praises you, they generate pride. This is where karma happens. This is where patterns are created and reinforced. This is what we usually think of as our personality. I'm an anxious person is really just a description of recurring mental formations. I'm a kind person is the same. Patterns upon patterns, running on autopilot. The fifth aggregate is consciousness. This is the raw knowing of an experience. It's the awareness that registers the sight, the sound, the thought. Consciousness itself isn't a thing. It's a series of moments. Eye consciousness arises when eye meets form. Ear consciousness arises when ear meets sound. Mind consciousness arises when mind meets thought. Each moment of consciousness is separate, distinct, gone as soon as it appears. Now here's what's crucial: we take these 5 processes, these 5 rivers of experience, and we bundle them together. We point to the whole bundle and say, me. But if you look closely, if you examine each aggregate in real time, you never actually find a self. You find body, feeling, perception, thoughts, awareness. But you never find an owner of any of it. You never find a permanent resident behind the scenes pulling the strings. This isn't just philosophy. You can test this right now. Bring your attention to your breathing. Feel the sensation of air entering your nostrils. That's form meeting feeling. Now notice that you're aware of that sensation. That's consciousness. Now notice that a thought might arise, this is interesting, or I'm bored. That's a mental formation. Now notice that you recognize that thought as a thought. That's perception. All 5 aggregates are right here, operating in every moment. But where is the you in all of this? Can you locate a single, unchanging self anywhere in this flow? This is what the Buddha invited people to see for themselves. Not to believe, but to investigate. And when people investigated deeply enough, they discovered something extraordinary. The thing they'd been protecting their whole lives, the thing they'd been so afraid of losing, wasn't actually there. Not as a solid, permanent entity. What a relief. What an unburdening. Imagine carrying a heavy suitcase for years, convinced it contains something precious. You guard it constantly. You worry about losing it. You arrange your whole life around protecting it. Then one day you finally set it down, open it, and discover it's empty. All that effort. All that anxiety. All that weight. For nothing. That's what realizing no self is like. Not a loss. A release. Now we arrive at something that might feel uncomfortable. If this self is really just a process, a collection of aggregates constantly flowing, then what does that mean for the fears that haunt us, the desires that drive us? This is where the teaching stops being abstract and starts touching everything. Let's begin with fear. Think about what you're most afraid of right now. Maybe losing your job. Maybe a relationship ending. Maybe being judged. Maybe getting sick. Underneath all of these specific fears is one fundamental fear, that this self will be diminished, harmed, or destroyed. Every fear is ultimately a fear for the self. But here's what becomes clear when you investigate: the self you're trying to protect is exactly what creates the fear. Without a self to protect, what would there be to fear? If there's no permanent me that can be harmed, then harm becomes just another experience. Pain becomes just sensation. Loss becomes just change. This isn't to say that a person who understands no self doesn't feel pain. Of course they do. But the suffering, the extra layer of anguish we add on top of pain, that's what falls away. There's a story about a man who built his entire identity around being a provider. He worked 60 hours a week, sacrificed his health, missed his children growing up, all to be the one his family could depend on. His worth was completely tied to this role. Then the company he worked for folded. Suddenly he couldn't provide. He sat at home, day after day, drowning in shame. He felt he had become nothing. One evening, his teenage daughter sat beside him and said, "Dad, I don't care about the money. I just miss you." In that moment, he saw it. The self he thought he was, the provider, had collapsed. But he was still there. His daughter was still there. Love was still there. The self he'd been protecting wasn't him at all. It was just a role. And letting it go didn't destroy him. It freed him to actually be present. Now let's look at desire. We spend enormous energy chasing what we want. A better job, a different relationship, more money, more recognition. The assumption is that getting what we want will make this self happy and secure. But notice what actually happens. You want something. You strive. Maybe you get it. For a moment, there's satisfaction. Then almost immediately, the self gets restless again. It needs something new to want. The self is like a fire that must constantly be fed. If the fuel stops coming, the fire goes out. And the self doesn't want to go out. But what if the fire wasn't you? What if the constant wanting is just a habit, not who you fundamentally are? When you see wanting as just wanting, just another mental formation arising and passing away, you stop being owned by it. You can want something without being consumed by the wanting. There's a story about a woman who was a brilliant painter. Art was her entire identity. Then she lost her eyesight due to illness. She fell into despair. Who was she without her art? One day, her young grandson visited and asked her to tell him a story. She began to speak, and as she spoke, she realized she could still create. She couldn't paint pictures on canvas, but she could paint them in his imagination with words. The identity of painter had to die for something new to be born. How do you actually do this in daily life? It starts with noticing. When fear arises, instead of immediately reacting, just notice, fear is here. Notice the physical sensations, the tight chest, the quick breath. Those are just body sensations. They're not you. Notice the thoughts, the catastrophic stories about what might happen. Those are just thoughts. They're not you. For one moment, just let all of it be there without identifying with it. In that moment, you're not the fear. You're the space in which fear is happening. The same with desire. When wanting arises, just notice, wanting is here. Notice the pleasant feeling that drives it, the thought that says, I need this. All of it is just aggregates doing their thing. None of it is you. For one moment, just let wanting be there without acting on it. In that moment, you're not the wanting. You're the space in which wanting is happening. I think of a teacher who was terrified of public speaking. Every time she had to address a room, her mind would flood with panic. She tried everything to eliminate the fear. Nothing worked. Then one day, she decided to stop fighting. She stood at the podium, felt the fear arise, and instead of resisting, she simply said to herself, fear is here. That's interesting. And then she began to speak. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer paralyzed her. She had stopped being the fear and had become the one observing it. Another person I knew was addicted to approval. He needed constant validation from others to feel okay about himself. A compliment would lift him up, a criticism would destroy him. He was a slave to others' opinions. Then he began to practice noticing. When praise came, he noticed the pleasant feeling, the swelling of pride, the thought, they like me. And he saw all of it as just passing phenomena. When blame came, he noticed the unpleasant feeling, the contraction, the thought, they don't appreciate me. And he saw that too as just passing phenomena. Slowly, he stopped needing either one. He discovered a sense of worth that didn't depend on what anyone thought. This practice of noticing, of creating space between awareness and experience, is what gradually weakens the grip of the self. It's not about getting rid of anything. It's about seeing clearly. And in that seeing, the things that used to control you start to lose their power. Fear comes, but it doesn't own you. Desire comes, but it doesn't drive you. You discover a peace that doesn't depend on conditions being a certain way. A peace that was always there, hidden behind the noise of the self. We've been exploring this idea that the self is not a solid thing but a process, a collection of 5 aggregates constantly flowing and changing. And we've looked at how fear and desire arise from trying to protect this constructed self. Now I want to take you deeper into what this means for the most intimate parts of your life, your relationships, your sense of worth, and your search for happiness. Consider your relationships for a moment. We enter relationships as selves looking for something. We want to be loved, to be seen, to be validated, to be safe. We bring our constructed self to the table and hope the other person will treat it gently, will reflect it back to us in a way that makes us feel good. And for a while, this might work. The early stages of a relationship are often so intoxicating because the other person seems to confirm everything we want to believe about ourselves. They think we're attractive. They think we're interesting. They think we're special. Our self gets fed, and we call that feeling love. But here's what inevitably happens. The other person, being a collection of aggregates themselves, cannot consistently feed our self forever. They have their own fears, their own desires, their own needs. Eventually, they fail to reflect us the way we want. They criticize us. They ignore us. They pay attention to someone else. And when that happens, the self feels threatened. It contracts. It defends. It attacks. Suddenly the person who was feeding ourself becomes the person threatening ourself. And we wonder what went wrong. We wonder why love turned into conflict. What if relationships could be something else entirely? What if instead of two selves trying to get something from each other, there was just meeting, just connection, just the raw experience of two flows of aggregates interacting without grasping? This is what becomes possible when the grip of self loosens. You can be with someone without needing them to be a certain way. You can hear criticism without feeling destroyed. You can offer love without demanding it back. The relationship stops being a transaction between selves and starts being a shared experience of being alive. There's a story about a couple who had been married for 40 years. They had raised children together, weathered storms together, built a life together. In all that time, they had also accumulated resentments. Small hurts that never got healed. Words said in anger that were never forgotten. Each of them carried a story about the other, a story about who the other was and what they had done. These stories were like walls between them. One day, the husband became very ill. As he lay in bed, too weak to speak much, the wife sat beside him. In the silence, she realized that the story she'd been carrying about him for 40 years was just a story. It wasn't him. It was a collection of memories, interpretations, and grievances that she had been holding on to. The man beside her, in this moment, was none of those stories. He was just a man, breathing, fading, present. And in that realization, the walls crumbled. What was left was not the relationship they had struggled with, but the connection that had always been there underneath. This is what happens when we stop relating to people through the filter of self. We start seeing them as they actually are, not as characters in our story. We start responding to what's actually happening, not to what our self thinks should be happening. Now let's talk about worth. So much of our suffering comes from the feeling that we are not enough. Not good enough, not successful enough, not lovable enough. We spend our lives trying to become enough. We achieve, we acquire, we improve, all in the hope that someday we'll finally feel worthy. But notice that the feeling of not being enough is itself a product of the self. The self is the one that judges. The self is the one that compares. The self is the one that says, I need to be better. Without a self to judge, there's just what's here. Just this moment, just this experience, just this breath. And in that simple presence, the question of worth doesn't even arise. I think of a woman who spent decades trying to prove herself. She came from a family where she was always compared to a more successful sibling. Nothing she did was ever quite enough. So she drove herself relentlessly. She became a successful lawyer, then a partner, then a judge. She had all the external markers of worth. And yet the feeling of not being enough never left. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, she sat alone in her chambers and wept. In that moment of exhaustion, the striving stopped. For just a moment, there was no her trying to be enough. There was just tears, just fatigue, just the simple experience of being alive. And in that moment, she felt something she had never felt before, peace. Not because she had finally become enough, but because for a moment there was no one there to judge whether she was enough or not. This is the liberation that the Buddha pointed to. It's not found at the end of striving. It's found in the cessation of striving. It's not found in becoming someone better. It's found in seeing through the whole project of becoming anyone at all. There's another story about a monk who lived simply in a small hut in the forest. He owned almost nothing: a robe, a bowl, a mat to sleep on. A visitor came one day and asked, "Aren't you lonely out here all alone?" The monk smiled and said, "I'm not alone. I'm with everything." The visitor didn't understand. The monk explained, "When there's no self to separate me from the world, the whole world becomes my companion. The trees, the birds, the wind, the rain, all of it is here with me. I lack nothing." This is the promise of understanding no self. Not that you disappear, but that you expand. Not that you become nothing, but that you become everything. The boundaries that seemed so real, so solid, start to dissolve. And what's on the other side of those boundaries is not emptiness in the sense of nothingness. It's fullness. It's connection. It's peace. We've been exploring how the sense of a solid, separate self creates suffering in our lives, in our fears, our desires, our relationships, our sense of worth. Now I want to take you into something that might be the most challenging aspect of this teaching, but also the most liberating. It's about what happens when we stop feeding this self altogether. What's left? The Buddha described 3 doors to liberation. Think of them as 3 different entry points into the same vast space. The first door is the signless. This comes from deeply understanding impermanence. When you see clearly that everything, every thought, every feeling, every sensation, every person, everything, is arising and passing away in every moment, you stop looking for something solid to hold on to. You stop searching for a permanent sign, a fixed characteristic that defines anything. And in that letting go of the search for permanence, you find freedom. The second door is the desireless. This comes from deeply understanding suffering. Not suffering as something to be feared or avoided, but suffering as a natural result of craving. When you see clearly that chasing after what you want never ultimately satisfies, that it's like drinking salt water to quench thirst, the drive to chase begins to lose its power. You stop reaching for the next thing, the better thing, the thing that will finally make everything okay. And in that stopping, you find freedom. The third door is emptiness. This comes from deeply understanding no self. When you see clearly that all phenomena, including this thing you call me, are empty of any permanent, independent essence, you stop defending and protecting. You stop building walls. You stop grasping at what you think you are. And in that letting go of self, you find freedom. These 3 doors are not separate. They're 3 ways of describing the same realization. When you truly see impermanence, you naturally stop desiring because you see that nothing you desire will last. When you truly see the suffering inherent in craving, you naturally stop identifying with the self that does the craving. When you truly see no self, you naturally rest in the emptiness that was always there. There's a story about a man who spent years searching for enlightenment. He traveled to monasteries, studied with teachers, read countless books, practiced meditation for hours every day. He was determined to find the truth. One day, exhausted from his searching, he sat down under a tree and fell asleep. When he woke, he saw a leaf falling from the tree. It drifted slowly, spinning in the air, and landed gently on the ground. In that moment, something shifted. He saw that the leaf wasn't trying to be anything. It wasn't striving to fall perfectly. It wasn't resisting the wind. It was just falling, completely itself, completely free. And he realized that he had been searching for something he already was. The truth wasn't at the end of his striving. It was right here, in the simple act of being alive. This is what we're pointing toward. Not a destination to reach, but a reality to recognize. Not something to become, but something to see that you've always been. Let me tell you about a woman I once knew. She was a successful executive, highly respected in her field, but internally she was tormented by a constant sense of inadequacy. She worked with a therapist for years, digging into her past, understanding her patterns, trying to heal the wounded self she believed was at her core. And she made progress. She understood herself better. But the fundamental sense of not being enough never completely left. One day, in a moment of frustration, she said to her therapist, "I've been trying to fix myself for so long. When will I finally be done?" The therapist said, "What if there's nothing to fix? What if the self you're trying to heal was never really there in the first place?" In that moment, she saw it. All those years of effort had been based on the assumption that there was a broken self that needed fixing. But if the self is just a process, just a collection of aggregates, then broken isn't an accurate description. It's just patterns. And patterns can be seen without being identified with. They can be allowed without being defended. This is the shift. From fixing to seeing. From becoming to being. From protecting to allowing. There's another story about a musician who played in a symphony orchestra. For years, he had struggled with performance anxiety. Before every concert, his mind would race with fear. What if I make a mistake? What if I ruin the performance? What if everyone judges me? He tried every technique to calm his nerves. Nothing worked. Then one day, a conductor said something to the orchestra before a performance. He said, "Tonight, don't play the music. Let the music play you." In that simple instruction, the musician understood. He had been so focused on himself, on his performance, his reputation, his fear, that he had forgotten that he was just a channel for something larger. That night, he stopped trying to be a good musician and simply became a space through which the music could flow. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it no longer mattered. He was no longer the center of the story. This is what it means to walk through the door of emptiness. You stop being the center. You stop being the main character. And in that letting go, you become part of something vast and beautiful and free. Now we arrive at the question that might be forming in your mind. If all of this is true, if the self is really just a process, if clinging to it causes suffering, if letting go brings freedom, then what about the path? What about the journey? Is there something we need to do to realize this? Or is it just about understanding? The Buddha spoke of 4 stages of enlightenment. Not as rewards for good behavior, but as descriptions of what happens as the grip of self gradually loosens. Think of them not as levels to achieve, but as landmarks on a journey of seeing more and more clearly. The first stage is called stream entry. This is the moment when a person sees the truth of no-self directly for the first time. Not as an idea, not as a belief, but as a direct experience. It's like someone who has lived their whole life in a dark room suddenly seeing a crack of light. They haven't stepped outside yet. They're still in the room. But now they know there's an outside. They know the light is real. And because they know this, they can never again believe that the dark room is all there is. A stream mentor has uprooted 3 deep-seated habits. The first is the view of self. They have seen directly that the I is a construction. They may still fall into old patterns of thinking, but they can never again truly believe that this small, separate self is who they are. It's like seeing that a magic trick works by sleight of hand. You might still be entertained by it, but you can never again believe it's real magic. The second habit uprooted is attachment to rituals. A stream mentor sees that no external action, no amount of praying or performing specific ceremonies, can bring about liberation. It can only come from understanding. This doesn't mean they stop participating in traditions or practices. But they no longer believe that the practice itself is what saves them. They see it as a tool, not as a solution. The third habit uprooted is skeptical doubt. A stream mentor has seen for themselves that the path the Buddha pointed to actually leads somewhere. Their faith is no longer based on believing someone else's words. It's grounded in their own experience. They may not be fully enlightened, but they know they're on the right track. There's a story about a woman who had been practicing meditation for years. She had moments of peace, moments of insight, but also long periods of doubt. She wondered if she was wasting her time. She wondered if enlightenment was even real or just a comforting myth. One day, during a retreat, she had an experience that shifted everything. It wasn't dramatic. There were no lights or visions. She was simply sitting, watching her breath, when suddenly she saw with complete clarity that the thoughts she had been fighting with her whole life, the self-critical thoughts, the anxious thoughts, the planning thoughts, were not her. They were just events arising and passing away in awareness. In that moment, doubt vanished. Not because she had achieved something, but because she had seen something. She knew, directly, that the path was real. The second stage is the once returner. This is someone who has weakened desire and aversion so much that they will only be reborn in this world of senses one more time. The fire of craving has been dampened. It still flickers, but it no longer blazes. The third stage is the non-returner. Here, sensual desire and ill will are completely abandoned. Such a person no longer seeks fulfillment through the senses. They no longer react with aversion to difficulty. They will never again be born as a human. The pull of the world is gone. The fourth stage is the arahant, the fully enlightened one. This is the complete uprooting of even the subtlest conceit of I am. There's no sense of a self anywhere, in any experience. Such a person still lives, still acts, still speaks, still thinks. But there's no sense that I am doing any of it. There's just the doing. Just the speaking. Just the thinking. And because there's no self-creating karma, no new seeds are planted. When the body finally ceases, there's no rebirth. The journey is complete. Now, this might all sound very far from your life. You might be thinking, I'm just trying to get through the day with a little less stress. This talk of arahants feels irrelevant. But here's the thing, the path to full enlightenment is made of the same steps you take every day. The insight that uproots the view of self is the same insight that allows you to pause before reacting in anger. The letting go that frees an arahant is the same letting go that allows you to release a grudge. The scale is different, but the quality is the same. Every moment of seeing clearly is a moment of liberation. Every time you notice a thought as just a thought, you weaken the grip of self. Every time you feel a difficult emotion without adding the story of "poor me," you create a little more space. Every time you let go of needing to be right, every time you receive criticism without collapsing, every time you offer kindness without expecting anything back, you are walking the path. You are moving toward freedom. So where does this leave us? We've spent this time together exploring the nature of self, the illusion of permanence, the freedom of letting go. But talk is just talk. Understanding intellectually is not the same as seeing directly. And seeing directly is not the same as living from that seeing. So how do we actually integrate this into a life? How do we move from concept to experience, from experience to transformation? The answer is practice. Not practice as in striving to achieve something, but practice as in showing up, again and again, to look clearly. Meditation is the laboratory where this investigation happens. Not because meditation is special or magical, but because it's the one place where we intentionally stop doing and start being. We stop chasing, stop planning, stop defending, stop becoming. We just sit, and we watch. And in that watching, the truth of no self begins to reveal itself. But meditation is not the only place this happens. Life itself becomes the practice when we bring this understanding into every moment. Waiting in line at the grocery store becomes an opportunity to watch impatience arise and pass away. A difficult conversation becomes an opportunity to notice the self contracting in fear. A moment of beauty becomes an opportunity to experience joy without needing to possess it. Everything becomes grist for the mill. Every experience, no matter how mundane or challenging, becomes a teacher. There's a story about a man who attended a meditation retreat and had a profound experience of no self. For a few days, he felt incredibly free. The usual weight of self was gone. He moved through the world with lightness and ease. Then he returned to his normal life, and slowly the old patterns crept back. Within a few weeks, he felt just as burdened as before. He went back to his teacher and said, "I saw the truth. Why did I lose it?" The teacher said, "Did you lose it, or did you just stop looking?" The man didn't understand. The teacher continued, "Seeing the truth once is like seeing the sun for the first time. You know it's there. But if you spend all your time indoors, you won't see it again. You have to keep going outside. You have to keep looking." This is the nature of practice. Insight needs to be refreshed. Understanding needs to be deepened. The self is a deeply ingrained habit. It takes consistent attention to loosen its grip. Not because the self is real and fighting back, but because the habit of identifying with it is so strong. It's like a path worn into a field. Even after you stop walking that way, the path remains visible. It takes time and repeated new walking for the grass to grow back and the old path to fade. Another story comes to mind, about a woman who struggled with chronic anger. She had been angry her whole life, and it had cost her relationships, jobs, peace of mind. She came to a teacher and said, "I've tried everything to get rid of this anger. Nothing works." The teacher said, "Show me this anger you want to get rid of." The woman said, "It's not something I can show you. It's inside me. The teacher said, then look inside. Find it. Point to it. The woman sat quietly and tried to find her anger. She looked for it as a thing, as an entity. And she couldn't find it. She found thoughts that were angry. She found physical sensations, heat, tension, pressure, tightness in her jaw and shoulders. She found memories of events that had triggered her. But the anger itself, as a separate thing she possessed, as something that belonged to her, she couldn't locate it anywhere. The teacher said, "You've been trying to get rid of something that was never there. You've been fighting a ghost. The thoughts and sensations will come and go. They always do. Let them. But stop believing they're you." This is the heart of the practice. Not fighting the aggregates, but seeing through them. Not trying to become someone without anger, but seeing that the one who would be angry or not angry is a construction. When that seeing is steady, anger loses its power. It may still arise, but it doesn't take over. It's like a fire that has no fuel. It flickers for a moment and then goes out. It arises, it does its dance, and it ceases. All without leaving a trace of identification behind. I think of a young man who was terrified of death. The thought of ceasing to exist haunted him. He couldn't sleep at night. He couldn't enjoy his life because he was so afraid of losing it. Every moment of happiness was shadowed by the thought that it would end. He went to a monk and confessed his fear. The monk said, "Show me the one who is afraid of dying." The young man was confused. The monk said, "Look for the one who will die. Find him. Point to him." The young man sat and looked. He looked in his body, but he knew his body was constantly changing, cells dying and being reborn, nothing permanent anywhere. He looked in his thoughts, but they came and went like clouds, never staying the same from one moment to the next. He looked in his feelings, but they were never the same, happiness arising, sadness passing, fear appearing and disappearing. He couldn't find any permanent self anywhere. No solid entity. No fixed resident. The monk said, "How can something that was never born die? How can something that was never there cease to exist? The self you're afraid of losing was never yours to lose. It was never anything but a thought." In that moment, the fear dissolved. Not because death had been conquered, but because the illusion of a self that could die had been seen through. What remained was not a self that would live forever, but a recognition that the question had been based on a mistake from the beginning. There's another story about a woman who was a successful surgeon. Her hands were her identity. They were skilled, precise, confident. Then she developed a tremor. At first it was barely noticeable, but it worsened. Soon she couldn't operate anymore. The thing that defined her, the thing she had spent decades training, the thing that gave her meaning and status and purpose, it was gone. She fell into a deep depression. She didn't know who she was anymore. One day, sitting in her garden, she watched a spider spinning a web. The web was intricate, beautiful, a masterpiece of design. Then a wind came and destroyed it completely. The spider didn't pause. It didn't grieve. It simply began spinning again. The woman watched and saw something she hadn't seen before. The spider wasn't attached to its web. It built it, it lost it, it built again. Its identity wasn't in the web. It was in the spinning. She realized she had been attached to the product of her work, not the work itself. She had been attached to the identity of surgeon, not to the act of healing. When she let go of the product, when she let go of the identity, she found she could still heal in other ways. She could teach, she could mentor, she could listen. The self that needed to be a surgeon had to die. But what was left was more than enough. This is the freedom that Buddhism points to. It's available to anyone willing to look. Not to believe, but to see for themselves. Not to achieve, but to recognize what's always been true. Every moment of practice, every moment of mindful attention, every moment of asking, who is experiencing this? These are the steps on the path. Not steps toward a distant goal, but steps that are themselves the goal. Each step taken in awareness is a moment of freedom. So I invite you to keep looking. In meditation, in daily life, in every moment. When fear arises, look for the one who is afraid. When desire arises, look for the one who wants. When anger arises, look for the one who is angry. When joy arises, look for the one who is happy. You won't find anyone there. You'll find the aggregates doing their dance, appearing and disappearing in an endless flow. And in that not finding, in that recognition that no permanent self can be located anywhere, you'll discover something more precious than anything you could have held on to. You'll discover freedom itself. We've journeyed far together in this exploration. We've looked at the nature of self, the 5 aggregates, the roots of fear and desire, the possibility of liberation. We've heard stories of people who lost identities and found something deeper, who let go of what they thought they were and discovered what they'd always been. Now I want to bring this all together and leave you with something to carry into your daily life. Not as a belief to hold, but as an invitation to keep investigating. The Buddha's teaching on no-self is often misunderstood as something negative, something that takes away our humanity. But the opposite is true. When we stop clinging to a small, separate self, we don't become less human. We become more fully human. The walls we built to protect ourselves also imprisoned us. When they come down, we don't disappear. We expand. We connect. We love more freely, live more fully, and suffer less. Think about the people in your life who seem most at peace. Not the ones with the most accomplishments or possessions, but the ones who radiate a kind of ease, a kind of openness. What's different about them? Often, it's that they're less caught up in themselves. They're not constantly worried about how they're being perceived. They're not endlessly strategizing about how to get what they want. They're just present. They're just here. And their presence creates space for others to be present too. This is what happens when the grip of self loosens. You become someone others can rest near. There's a story about a woman who worked as a hospice nurse for over 30 years. She spent her days with people who were dying. At first, she found the work difficult and depressing. She was surrounded by loss, by grief, by fear. But over time, something shifted. She noticed that the patients who were most at peace at the end of their lives were not the ones who had achieved the most or accumulated the most. They were the ones who had let go the most. They had let go of grudges carried for decades. They had let go of regrets about paths not taken. They had let go of the need to be someone important. In their letting go, in the final days when there was nothing left to hold on to, they had found a kind of freedom that those still clinging could barely imagine. The nurse began to see her work not as being with death, but as being with the process of letting go. And she realized that this was something everyone could learn, not just at the end of life, but throughout life. Another story comes to mind, about a man who was a lifelong collector. He collected art, rare books, antiques. His home was filled with objects, each one carefully acquired over decades. He took great pride in his collection. It was part of his identity. Then a wildfire swept through his community. He had minutes to evacuate. He grabbed what he could and fled. When he returned, his home and everything in it was gone. He walked through the ashes, expecting to feel devastated. And he did feel sadness. But mixed with the sadness was something unexpected, relief. The weight of caring for all those objects was gone. The constant worry about theft or damage was gone. The need to keep acquiring, to keep adding to the collection, all of it was gone. He realized that his possessions had been possessing him. Their loss, which he had feared for so long, turned out to be a kind of liberation. This is the paradox of self. The thing we cling to most tightly is the very thing that causes our suffering. And the loss we fear most is often the very thing that would set us free. We spend our lives protecting this self, feeding this self, and we never stop to ask whether the self is even real. When we finally do look, we discover that the emperor has no clothes. The self we've been guarding so fiercely was a phantom all along. I think of a teacher who worked for many years in a maximum security prison. He led meditation groups among men serving life sentences. Most had lost everything. Freedom, family, future, reputation. One might expect them to be consumed by despair. And some were. But others had found something unexpected in their confinement. With nothing left to cling to, no status, no possessions, no future to plan, some had begun to let go of self in a way that people on the outside rarely do. One man said to him, "I spent my whole life running after things I thought I needed. Now I have nothing. And I see that I never needed any of it. I'm more free in this cell than I ever was outside." This is not to romanticize prison. Prison is a terrible thing. But the story points to something important. The self we protect so fiercely is not the source of our freedom. It's the source of our bondage. And when circumstances force us to let go, we sometimes discover that what's left is not nothing. It's everything. So what does this mean for you, right now, in your life? It means that every moment of difficulty is also a moment of opportunity. Every time things don't go your way, every time you're criticized or ignored or hurt, you have a choice. You can do what the self has always done. You can contract. You can protect. You can fight. You can blame. That's one path. It's the well-worn path of suffering. But there's another path. In that same moment, you can pause. You can look. You can notice the contraction happening. You can feel the fear in your body, the tightness in your chest. You can observe the thoughts racing through your mind. And in the midst of all that, you can ask, who is it that feels threatened? Where is this self that needs protecting? When you look honestly, you won't find anyone there. You'll find body sensations, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, consciousness. But you won't find an owner. You won't find a permanent resident. And in that seeing, the threat loses its power. The difficulty becomes just another experience, passing through. There's a story about a woman who had been through a painful divorce. She carried the wound for years. Every time she thought about her ex-husband, she felt the same anger, the same hurt, the same sense of injustice. She had built an entire identity around being wronged. One day, a friend said to her, "You've been carrying this for so long. What would it feel like to put it down?" The woman said, "I can't. It's part of who I am." The friend said, "What if who you are is something larger than this story? What if you've been mistaking a chapter for the whole book?" In that moment, something shifted. She saw that she had been clinging to the wound because it had become her identity. Without it, who would she be? But as she sat with the question, she realized that the who she was afraid of losing was exactly the problem. Letting go of the story didn't erase her. It freed her. This is the invitation. Not to wait until death forces us to let go, but to practice letting go now. To loosen the grip of self while we still have time to enjoy the freedom that comes with it. In traffic, in arguments, in quiet moments alone, in joy and in sorrow. The invitation is always there, let go and see what's left. What's left is not nothing. It's everything. It's the peace that was always there, hidden behind the noise of self. It's the love that was always there, obscured by fear. It's the freedom that was always there, waiting to be recognized. Thank you for being here at Monk's Temple. May you see clearly. May you let go gently. And may you rest in the freedom that has always been yours.